In this lecture, let us completely understand about promises in JavaScript. So before that, let us see one simple example of promise. And in our last lecture, we have seen callback help. So using promises, we can escape callback help. Let us see one simple example. Now I have created promise.js. I will come to ajax call.js, and from here I will just copy this entire thing, and inside this I'm just going to paste. I will just comment this. We have already seen this is the old way of requesting data using XML HTTP request. Now we are going to see more modern way of making Ajax call, that is by using fetch function. Now simply I will be writing fetch function, and inside this I'm just going to copy this entire URL, and here I will be pasting. Now whatever result I will be getting from this fetch function, I have to store inside one variable. I will give my variable name as data, and below this simply I'm just going to log this one. Now as soon as I save, you can see fetch function immediately returned promise, and here we have something called pending. If I open, then here I am having promise state to be fulfilled, and below that I am having response. And inside this, we are having multiple properties. Later on, we are going to understand. But as of now, you should understand fetch function immediately returned promise. And inside this fetch function, we can pass multiple parameters. But as of now, only to understand what result we get, we have passed only one parameter. We can also pass objects of option, like we can pass object, and based on that we can pass multiple values inside that object. Now here we got promise. So let us understand what is promise in JavaScript. Promise is nothing but it is like a container for holding future value. Suppose if we create input field, and inside that input field we will be passing some placeholder, enter your name. So based on that, we will be getting some value, whether user will be entering the value or user will not enter the value. So promise is similar to that. It is like a container or placeholder to hold future values. So this is the more formal definition. If you want, you can write this definition, or you can simply write it is a container for future value. So in JavaScript, promise is nothing but it is an object which will represent the completion or failure of asynchronous operation and its resulting value. So whatever value we get at the end, that value will be fulfilled or it will be rejected. We will understand different states of promises. And promise is nothing but it is a way to handle asynchronous operation in more easy, elegantly, and also using promises we can avoid callback hell, because we can chain promises instead of passing multiple callback functions. And promises were introduced in ES6, that is ECMAScript 6, and it was available in 2015. So before that, we did not have promises and we used to go into callback hell. Now using more modern way of JavaScript, we can use promises and we can make our code more readable, more understandable, and also we can write error-free code. So let us understand promises using one simple analogy. So just imagine you have bought chips, and inside chips packet we are having one gift. So to get this gift we have to pay extra money. Okay, but we don't know whether gift is present or not. But you can buy this chips packet only if you pay extra money. If you don't pay extra money, then you will not be able to buy this chips packet. So basically, we bought the promise share and we are not sure whether gift will be present or not. While packing these chips, gifts will be placed in random order. There will not be any specific order in placing the gifts inside the chips packet. It will be in random order. That is nothing but it will happen asynchronously. And if I get the gift, then whatever extra money I have paid, that will be worth it and my promise will be kept. But here the scenarios are, I am not sure whether gift is available or not inside the chips packet. So now you will be having a question, then what is the advantage of using a promise? Because we are not aware what will be the final result. So the main advantage is we will not be able to rely on events and also callbacks which we have passed in our last lecture to understand callback help. And here, before opening this chips packet, if you're stuck in some other work, later on you can come, you can open the packet and you can see the result. So in between, you can perform any operation, you can perform any work, you don't have to wait for the result. So with this, we can easily escape callback help. So in our last lecture, we have understood without getting country data, I cannot get my neighbor's country data. So here, when we are using promises, we don't have to wait for the final result. In between, we can perform any task. So that is the reason using promises, we can easily escape callback hell. And you should remember one thing, promises work with asynchronous operation. So they will be time sensitive and they can change over time. So for that, promises can be in different states. So let us understand promise life cycle. First, promise will be pending, and pending state is nothing but before we get any future value. Now, during this time, we can perform any asynchronous task in the background. We do not have to wait for the promise. Once the task is completed successfully, our promise will be settled. Then we are having two different states in settled promise, and here our asynchronous task has finished, and we have two different states of settled promise. Either our promise will be fulfilled or our promise will be rejected promise. So a fulfilled promise is nothing but successfully we are able to get the result and the value is available for us, and rejected promise is nothing but we have not got any result and we got some error. So in case of fetch function, we are fetching API data. So if we get the result, that means successfully we are able to get the value. If we are offline and if we are trying to fetch the data, then our promise will be rejected. Now let us understand this concept using our analogy. Now here I bought the promise, that is my chips, and initially it will be pending because I am not aware whether I will be getting gift or not. So my promise is pending. So in between I can perform any task. I don't have to wait for my chips to be opened. In between I can perform any task. Later on, once I open the chips, then our promise will be settled, and in that case I will be having two states. Either my promise will be fulfilled, that is, I will be getting my gift, or my promise will be rejected, that is, I have wasted my extra money. So, this is the life cycle of promise. Understanding these different states are very important because when we use promise in our code, we will be able to handle these different states in order to get successful promise or rejected promise. And also, it is very important to note that a promise is settled only once. For same promise, we cannot settle the promise twice. It is settled only once. And this state will be remained unchanged, which means either my promise will be fulfilled or it will be rejected. Now here, the states what I have mentioned, these are useful when we use a promise to get a result, which is called as consuming promise. So consuming promise is nothing but when we already have a promise with us. Example, we have already seen fetch function directly returned promise. Now what we can do? We can easily consume the promise. But for a promise to exist, first we need to build the promise. But in our example, we have seen fetch function directly return the promise and from there we can consume the promise. So here Fetch function is building the promise, and in return, we can consume the promise. So in this case, when we are using fetch function, we don't have to build the promise by ourselves. Directly, we can consume the promise. And this is the example, fetch function is directly returning the promise. But most of the time, whenever we are fetching data from API, we always consume the promise because fetch function is directly building the promise for us. But in this series, we will also see how to build promise and how to consume the promise.